The chamber fell silent when the final vote was cast. Representative Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's podium, her hands gripping the cold metal rail as the holographic numbers flickered above. 712 votes against, 43 in favor. The Galactic Senate had spoken, and humanity had lost its voice in the stars. For 300 years, humans had earned their place among the stars. They had built colonies on distant worlds. They had traded fairly with 100 species. They had sent their sons and daughters to fight in wars that were not their own. And now, with a simple vote, the Senate had declared that humans were no longer worthy of representation. The Velthri ambassador, a tall creature with scales that shimmered like oil on water, rose from his seat. His voice echoed through the massive chamber. The motion passes. Effective immediately, all human colonies are reclassified as protectorate territories. Human citizens will no longer hold voting rights within Senate jurisdiction. This decision is final. Elena looked across the chamber at the faces of beings she had once called allies. The Kathrani turned their eyes away. The Morlax delegation whispered among themselves. Not one of them spoke in defense of humanity. Not one of them remembered the blood that human soldiers had spilled to save their worlds from the Hive War. She walked out of the chamber without a word. There was nothing left to say. 3 months passed, and the humans did what they had always done. They adapted. They survived. They remembered. On Earth, protests filled the streets of every major city. On Mars, workers refused to mine the minerals that powered half the galaxy's ships. On the colony worlds, human governors quietly began stockpiling supplies and strengthening defenses. The Senate watched with growing concern. They had expected submission. They had expected humans to accept their new place in the galactic order. Instead, they received silence. No human ships carried goods to Senate ports. No human engineers maintained Senate stations. No human soldiers answered calls for peacekeeping missions. Admiral James Chun stood on the bridge of the carrier Defiance and watched the stars through the viewport. His fleet of 47 ships hung in the darkness above Colony Prime, the largest human settlement outside the Sol system. They were not warships by galactic standards. They were outdated, patched together from salvage parts and human stubbornness. But they were all humanity had. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we're receiving a transmission from Senate Command. Priority 1. Chun nodded. "Put it through." The holographic image of a Velthri admiral appeared before him. The creature's scales rippled with colors that Chun had learned to recognize as arrogance. "Human Commander, you are ordered to stand down your fleet immediately. Your refusal to comply with Senate trade directives constitutes an act of rebellion. The Imperial fleet has been dispatched to restore order to your colonies. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." Chun stared at the alien for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. How many ships? The Velthri hesitated. 300 vessels of the line. Enough to remind you of your place. "I see," Chun said. "And you expect us to surrender? We expect you to be reasonable. You cannot win this fight. Your species is young. Your technology is primitive. Your fleet is insignificant compared to the might of the Empire." Chun leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about humans, Admiral. We came from a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived ice ages, plagues, and predators. We climbed out of caves and reached for the stars with nothing but fire and determination. We earned everything we have. We fought for every inch of ground, every discovery, every achievement. And now you think you can take it all away with a vote?" The transmission ended. Chun turned to face his bridge crew. Every face showed the same expression. Fear mixed with determination. Anger burning beneath the surface. "All hands," he said. "Prepare for battle." The Imperial fleet arrived 4 days later. 300 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls gleaming with advanced alloys, their weapons ports glowing with barely contained energy. Any reasonable species would have surrendered at the sight of them. Humans were not reasonable. The first wave of human ships broke from formation and drove straight into the heart of the Imperial fleet. They were not trying to win through superior firepower. They were trying to create chaos. Small, fast frigates weaved between massive battlecruisers, their weapons firing continuously. Missiles streaked through space, not aimed at critical systems, but at sensor arrays and communication dishes. The Imperial commanders had trained for centuries against species that fought in predictable patterns. They had models and simulations for every known combat doctrine in the galaxy. They had no model for what the humans were doing. "They're insane," the Velthari admiral said as he watched two human frigates collide deliberately with an Imperial carrier, their crews ejecting at the last second. The carrier's shields flickered and died. A third human ship, barely larger than a shuttle, rammed through the opening and detonated its reactor inside the carrier's hangar bay. The explosion tore the carrier apart from within. On Colony Prime, Elena Vasquez watched the battle unfold on 1,000 screens. She had returned from the Senate to lead the civilian resistance, coordinating the evacuation of non-combatants and the distribution of supplies to underground shelters. Around her, men and women worked without rest, their faces grim but focused. "They're breaking through," someone said. 3 Imperial ships have entered orbit. Elena nodded. "Begin evacuation protocol 7. Get everyone underground." The 3 ships descended through the atmosphere like falling stars. They were troop carriers, each one holding 10,000 Imperial soldiers. The Velthari had decided that orbital bombardment was too merciful. They wanted to conquer humanity in person. They wanted to see humans kneel. The first carrier landed outside the capital city. Its massive doors opened, and soldiers poured out in neat ranks. They were elite troops, veterans of a dozen pacification campaigns. They advanced toward the city with confidence, their weapons ready. They found the streets empty. "Where are they?" a squad leader asked, his translated voice uncertain. "Where are all the humans?" The answer came in the form of an explosion that threw him off his feet. Then another, then 100 more. The humans had not fled. They had prepared. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a kill zone. Snipers fired from windows. Improvised explosives erupted from beneath the pavement. Armed civilians appeared from nowhere, fired their weapons, and vanished into the underground tunnel networks before the soldiers could respond. The Velthari commander ordered his troops to advance. They died by the hundreds. He ordered them to retreat. They died by the hundreds. He called for air support, but the human pilots in orbit had targeted every Imperial ship with any remaining weapons capability. Help was not coming. In space, the battle had turned. The Imperial fleet still outnumbered the humans 6-1, but numbers meant nothing when every human ship fought like a wounded animal. They used their own debris as weapons, ramming dead hulls into active ships. They hijacked communication frequencies and flooded Imperial systems with conflicting orders. They boarded enemy vessels and fought hand-to-hand through corridors designed for beings twice their size. Admiral Chun watched as another Imperial battlecruiser broke apart under concentrated fire. His own ship had taken heavy damage. Half his crew was dead or wounded. 3 of his engines were offline, but he was still fighting. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, "the Imperial flagship is attempting to retreat." Chen smiled that same unpleasant smile. "No, they don't get to leave. All ships, pursue and destroy." The flagship tried to jump to faster-than-light speed. A human destroyer, its hull breached in a dozen places, positioned itself directly in the jump path and detonated its entire weapons payload. The explosion disrupted the flagship's jump calculations. The massive ship tore itself apart as it attempted to enter hyperspace at an impossible angle. The remaining Imperial ships scattered. Some managed to escape. Most did not. When the battle ended, the space above Colony Prime was filled with wreckage from both fleets. The humans had lost 31 ships. The Empire had lost 247. On the ground, the fighting continued for 3 more days. The Imperial soldiers, cut off from support and surrounded by a hostile population that knew every tunnel and hiding place, eventually threw down their weapons. 16,000 Velthari surrendered to a species they had been told was primitive and weak. Elena Vasquez stood before the captured soldiers and addressed them through translators. "Tell your Senate what happened here. Tell them that we did not start this war. Tell them that we asked for nothing but equality and respect. And tell them this: if they ever try to take our rights again, we will come for them, not to their colonies, not to their fleets, to their homes, to their Senate chamber, to every world they hold dear. We did not ask to be warriors. You made us this way." The captured soldiers were released and sent back to Senate space. They carried with them recordings of the battle, testimonies from survivors, and a simple message from Admiral Chun: "The next fleet you send will not return." The Galactic Senate convened an emergency session. The Velthari ambassador, his scales now a pale gray of fear, proposed immediate restoration of human voting rights. The motion passed unanimously. Additional proposals followed: reparations for the colonies, formal apologies from every species that had voted against humanity, and a guarantee that no member species would ever again face discrimination based on age or technological development. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez returned to the Senate chamber. She took her place at the human delegation's podium, the same podium where she had once stood in defeat. The chamber was silent, but this time the silence held a different quality: respect, fear, recognition. She looked across the assembly at the faces of beings who had once dismissed her species as insignificant. "Humanity accepts the Senate's apology," she said, "but we will not forget. We came to the stars in peace. We asked only to be treated as equals. When you denied us that right, we showed you what we are capable of. Now you know. Humans do not surrender. Humans do not submit. Humans do not forget." She paused and let her words sink in. "We forgive you because that is also what humans do. But remember this day. Remember what it cost you to learn that lesson. And never make us teach it again." The chamber remained silent as she finished speaking. No one moved. No one spoke. And somewhere in the vastness of space, 47 battered human ships continued their patrol, a reminder that rights are not given. They are defended. They are fought for, and sometimes they are taken back.